War for your mind. Welcome to the show. What if I told you that the most important battles in history were not fought with guns, but with ideas in a hidden war for your mind? Today, we are exploring the world of psychological operations, pulling back the curtain on the war for your mind where reality itself is the ultimate battlefield. The war on ideas. We like to believe we live in free societies, but how real is that freedom when the state itself declares a war on ideas? Can a democracy truly function if its own government actively works to discredit, disrupt, and neutralize dissenting voices from within? We are about to explore the unsettling history of governments turning their most powerful weapons against their own people. Why did programs like COINTELPRO go beyond simple surveillance? Simple surveillance is passive. It is merely watching the garden for weeds, but COINTELPRO was about actively ensuring the garden could never grow anything the state did not approve of. The goal was not just to know what dissidents were thinking, it was to poison the soil of their movements so that nothing could ever take root. It is the ultimate form of control, not just punishing dissent, but making it psychologically impossible to organize in the first place. How did they turn activists against each other? They introduced an element of corrosive paranoia into the ecosystem of these groups, like adding a powerful acid to water. This acid, the constant fear of betrayal, did not just weaken the bonds between activists, it dissolved the very trust that held the movement together. Ultimately, the movement collapses from the inside, with the members becoming the agents of their own destruction. What was the ultimate goal of Operation Chaos against anti-war protesters? The state viewed the anti-war movement not as a legitimate political stance, but as a dangerous contagion threatening to weaken the national resolve. Operation Chaos was therefore a form of psychological quarantine, designed to isolate and neutralize the virus of peace before it could spread. The ultimate goal was to ensure that the government's narrative about the war was the only one the public was allowed to hear. Why was discrediting leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. so important? A movement is a body, but a leader like Martin Luther King Jr. is its head. They provide direction, inspiration, and a single point of focus. Discrediting the leader is like taking the keystone from an arch. The entire structure of the movement loses its integrity and collapses under its own weight. It is a strategic decapitation designed to leave the body of the movement confused, demoralized, and rudderless. Why did the Canadian government feel the need to discredit the Quebec sovereignty movement with Operation Parasol? The Canadian state perceived the Quebec sovereignty movement as an existential threat that could tear the country apart. Operation Parasol was born from a desperate logic that it was better to break the law to discredit a movement than to risk the nation itself breaking apart. It was a calculated act of self-preservation, where the government decided to commit a smaller crime to prevent what it saw as a larger one. Engineering consent for conflict. We often think of war as a physical battle, but the first front is always the battle for public opinion. This raises a profound question. Can a war ever be considered just if the consent to fight is itself engineered through deception? We will now delve into the machinery of propaganda used to build the case for some of history's most consequential conflicts. How did the Bush administration build the case for the Iraq War? The administration needed to create a story with a clear and present danger, a villain that demanded immediate action. They functioned as master playwrights, carefully staging intelligence and narratives to ensure the public saw a terrifying threat in Iraq that justified a preemptive war. The goal was to make the invasion feel not like a choice, but like an absolute necessity. What is the long-term psychological cost of such a campaign? The cost is a deep, pervasive cynicism that poisons public trust for generations, like a slow-acting venom. Once the public realizes they were deliberately misled into supporting a war, they begin to question every official statement, creating a permanent scar of distrust. This erosion of faith in institutions is often a more lasting wound than the war itself. Why was propaganda so vital in World War I? In the age before mass media saturation, a government needed to physically mobilize its population for a conflict like World War I. Propaganda was the engine of a vast social factory, not building tanks or guns, but manufacturing a singular, unified national will to fight and sacrifice. It was about transforming millions of individuals into a single, cohesive war machine. How did the British control the narrative during the Falkland Creek? The British government understood that the Falklands War would be won or lost in the minds of the public back home. They created a hermetically sealed information pipeline to the press, ensuring that only sanitized, heroic, and pro-war stories reached the people. It was not about lying, necessarily, but about ensuring the public only saw the war through a carefully polished, patriotic lens. How did the U.S. military use psychological warfare in Vietnam to manage public perception back home? The military was losing the war on the ground in Vietnam, so they waged a second war on the television screens back home. They created optimistic victory narratives that were essentially fictional, like building an elaborate movie set of success to hide the grim reality of the conflict. The goal was to maintain public support and funding by projecting an illusion of progress that simply did not exist. Architects of fear. Forget nuclear bombs. The most powerful weapon in history might be the ability to control what an entire nation fears and what it worships. We are now exploring the architects of fear and ideology. Those who understood that shaping a population's core beliefs is the ultimate form of power. They did not just rule nations. They built the very reality their people lived in. What was the core psychological engine of Nazi propaganda? The psychological engine was a form of political alchemy designed to transmute the base metals of national humiliation and economic anxiety into the pure gold of weaponized hatred. Joseph Goebbels did not just spread lies. He created a powerful, mythic narrative where the German people were heroes and minorities were demonic villains responsible for all their suffering. This transformed politics into a religious crusade, making any atrocity seem not only acceptable, but necessary. Why was the constant repetition of simple messages so effective? A single lie is easily dismissed, but a message repeated 1,000 times begins to feel like the truth. This principle works like water carving a canyon through stone. The sheer persistence of the message wears down critical thinking and creates deep, unchangeable channels of belief in the public consciousness. It is not about the quality of the message, but the brute force of its repetition. How did Stalinist propaganda maintain a climate of fear? The system was designed to turn every citizen into a potential informant, creating a society that policed itself through fear. The core of Stalinist propaganda was a simple, terrifying story. The state is surrounded by enemies, and your neighbor, your friend, even your family could be one of them. This transformed the entire Soviet Union into a psychological prison where the inmates themselves were the guards. What was the purpose of the East German stasis Zersitzung or decomposition? This was a uniquely cruel tactic, a form of psychological warfare aimed at a single person. Zersetsun was like a swarm of invisible termites that would slowly and methodically eat away at the foundations of a person's life, their career, their friendships, their sanity. The goal was to make the target feel isolated, paranoid, and emotionally shattered, causing them to collapse from within without a single physical blow. Why was this method considered more effective than overt violence? A punch leaves a bruise, a visible sign of oppression that can inspire resistance and outrage. But Zersetsun leaves no visible marks. It is a silent, soul-crushing poison that makes the victim appear to be the author of their own demise. This makes it far more effective for the state, as it neutralizes a dissident without creating a martyr. What was the psychological purpose of Mussolini's mass rallies? These rallies were not political meetings. They were powerful rituals of social alchemy. Their purpose was to melt down individual identity and recast it into a single, unified collective consciousness that was fused with the leader. In that sea of chanting and saluting, the I dissolves, and only the we of the fascist state remains, with Mussolini as its living embodiment. The media as a weapon. We rely on the media to be our window to the world, but what happens when that window is secretly a screen projecting a reality created by government puppeteers? We are about to question everything you think you know about the news, exploring how the media itself has been used as a weapon. Can you ever truly trust what you see and hear again? What was the real mission of Operation Mockingbird? The mission was to turn the American media into an unwitting instrument of state power. Operation Mockingbird was not about planting stories, but about planting assets. It was like installing a secret microphone in the collective mind of the public. This allowed the CIA to subtly shape the national conversation and ensure that reporting on foreign policy never strayed too far from the official narrative. Why would a journalist agree to participate in such a program? It is a complex cocktail of patriotism, ambition, and sometimes a genuine belief that they are serving a higher cause. A journalist might be convinced that they are helping to protect national security, framing their collaboration as a form of patriotic duty. For others, the access and prestige that come from cooperating with intelligence agencies are simply too tempting to resist, blurring the line between journalism and state service. How does the concept of a fear industry work? Think of it as a thermostat for public anxiety, with the media and government holding the controls. When they need public support for new security measures or military action, they can dial up the fear industry, amplifying threats to make the population feel unsafe and more willing to accept a loss of liberty in exchange for protection. It is a powerful tool for manufacturing consent by managing the emotional temperature of the nation. Why is an unseen or abstract enemy so powerful for this industry? A specific enemy has a face and can be understood, but a vague, shapeless threat like terrorism is a psychological blank canvas. The abstract nature of the enemy allows the state to paint any face it wants onto it, making it a versatile and permanent justification for surveillance and war. It is a monster that can never be truly defeated, ensuring the fear industry always has a reason to exist. How is the war on drugs campaign a psychological operation? The campaign was a masterful piece of political sleight of hand, a trick designed to misdirect the public's attention. The true target was not drugs, but the counterculture and minority groups associated with them. By linking these groups to a substance that could be criminalized, the state found a way to disrupt their political movements and imprison their members under the guise of a public health crisis. The new frontier. We have seen how these tactics worked in an age of newspapers and television, but what happens when they are supercharged by algorithms and social media? We now turn to the new frontier of influence, exploring how these timeless strategies of manipulation are evolving in our hyper-connected digital world. The stage has changed, but the play remains the same. How did the U.S. government sell the 2008 bank bailout to a skeptical public? The government was facing a public that was furious about bailing out the very institutions that caused the crisis. The strategy was to frame the 2008 bank bailout not as a choice, but as a painful but necessary medical procedure, an amputation to save the patient. This narrative transformed a deeply unpopular policy into an act of responsible leadership, the only thing preventing a total economic collapse. Why did the Australian government spread disinformation about asylum seekers? The goal was to construct a psychological wall against asylum seekers long before any physical wall could be built. By spreading disinformation about boat people, the government painted them as a dangerous, criminal flood threatening to overwhelm the nation's culture and security. This dehumanization made a harsh immigration policy seem not just reasonable, but essential for national survival. How did Russian actors use social media in the Central African Republic? This was a modern evolution of classic propaganda, perfectly adapted for the digital age. Russian actors did not need to control newspapers or TV stations. They simply planted thousands of digital seeds of pro-Russian narratives on social media. These seeds, watered by algorithms and shared by real users, grew into a dense forest of favorable public opinion that legitimized Russia's presence in the country. What was the goal of China's narrative control during the SARS outbreak? The initial outbreak was a story of failure, a monster that had escaped the lab, but the state could not allow that narrative to survive. So, they became real-time scriptwriters, transforming the story from one of incompetence into a heroic epic of the nation defeating a deadly threat. The goal was narrative control, ensuring that the government was seen not as the cause of the crisis, but as the sole, triumphant savior.